All right, I want to go over something that I probably will cover in class, but if I haven't already, but I want to just show you guys the process of creating your underpainting. Normally, you'll go further than this and you'll paint on top of it even when it's wet. So you want to keep in mind the colors that are down and compensate for them in your color mixtures and whatnot. But this is what's called an imprimatura. So it's basically putting this layer of thin paint down and establishing your lights and darks. I have put down the vine charcoal and the charcoal pencil over top of the main lines and sprayed it really well. And you can spray it really, really well when it's a painting because you don't have to worry about it staining through because the oil paint's going to cover it all for the most part as far as the fixative goes. Here's my mineral spirits that's been used, so it's a little green. My mineral spirits, I got my white and I got brown and a little bit of another color here, but for the most part we're just going to use the brown and some other methods that I'm going to show you here right now. So what we're basically doing is we're going to use the paint medium. In this case, we're using Galkid. You can use linseed oil. You can also technically use the mineral spirits, but it's not a good idea because it's very fumy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just, I could put this in a little container, like I could use a cap or something, but I'm just going to pour it on the table because it's viscous enough, or on the glass palette. It's viscous enough that it shouldn't run off. Especially pouring it slow. If I poured a bunch down, then I'd probably regret it pretty quickly. But that little bit, that's not gonna, go anywhere. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by taking a rag. You want a rag that has no oil paint on it. The good thing is you just started doing this, so you probably don't have any rags that have wet oil paint on it. It doesn't have to have no oil paint, it just can't be wet. But I'm going to take a rag and I'm going to kind of make like a little bit of a wad. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to dip it in either the brown paint or in the mineral spirits, or I mean in the Galkid medium. And I'm going to do the other one next, right? So in this case, I'm starting with the gel, with the medium, I should say. And I'm gonna then take some of the brown, and then I'm gonna take it to the canvas and I'm gonna rub it on here. And in this case, I sprayed my drawing and I let it dry, so it's not really smearing off. If you don't let it dry very long or you don't spray it very well, it is gonna smear right off of there, or at least a little bit. But I did a pretty good job of making sure that didn't happen. So I want to put this on, and it doesn't have to be super perfect. It can have lights and darks because you're going to put paint all over this whole thing. Don't paint the sides because if you paint the sides, it makes it harder to pick it up. But you do want to go a little bit onto the edge because the edges of these these store-bought canvases are usually rounded. So if you were to ever put it in a frame, that little white spot would stick out. I'm going to pick it up for a minute. Not a great idea, but I'm going to pick it up so I can get the very bottom where my easel is. Always remember that when you get oil paint on your skin or on anything other than the brush, or in this case the rag, you want to stop what you're doing immediately and get it off of there because it's going to get on everything else. Now, when you're doing this staining process, you want to use something that's relatively neutral, like a brown or a blue or a gray. And again, you don't have to put it on super perfect because you're going to add some stuff on there, or add tons of colors and values and stuff on there. So it's no big deal. You also don't have to draw in all your lights and darks like this as much before you do this next part here. But you just really want to make sure you cover the whole canvas as much as you can. All right, now what I want to do is I want to use the rag to remove some more light areas. So I'm going to go to a clean spot on the rag, and like so, no wet paint. And I'm going to wipe out my highlights. And I'm going to go to an even cleaner spot to wipe it out a little bit more. And I can get it really bright by making sure that I clean it off as best I can and go to a new spot. However, I can also make more medium tones simply by using the same spot on the rag to go over multiple passes on the surface, right? So something along those lines. And then I could do this for the whole lights and darks, but my overall tone is pretty light. So I'm gonna go ahead and add some more paint to it, and then I'll subtract a little bit more and maybe even add some white and some more brown. But what I want to remember is all art is like a process. It's a reaction to what I'm doing, right? To what I've done, what I'm doing reflects what I've done, and what I've done reflects what I'm doing, right? So so I want to kind of always react to what I've got, and so it's important to do this staining process so that your colors have a common unifying factor behind them. There's something for the layers of color to be based off of, but also, in my opinion, one of the best parts of it is so that if you do have a spot where the paint's a little thinner or where two edges don't quite match up, you don't have a bright white spot showing through those two colors and making the painting look less professional, right? So, all right, now with that said, now I'm going to go back in. I'm going to take a brush now, and I'm going to go ahead and grab some more of the brown. Now, what you got to remember is when you're doing this process and it's still wet, you don't have to keep dipping in medium unless you want to. If you dip in too much medium, then you're going to have some adhesion problems and just some way too much oil and stuff on there. You don't need to do that. So you can just dip in paint usually if the surface is wet. You can continue to dip a little bit, but you just want to be cautious not to overdo it. So what I'm going to do is, a lot of times in these quick studies like this, you know, a rough background that just uses some of the colors that are in the composition is all you need. And so I'm going to take some of the brown and I'm going to apply it. I'm going to go ahead and paint right over that stem. And it's always a good idea with any type of painting process to paint from the back forward and add details slowly. So I'm not going to worry about covering this whole background perfectly. I want the strokes to kind of stay in there, but I don't want them all to go exactly the same direction, so I speed down the movement that's caused. All right, so now I've got that a little more solid, a little more established. This is a little too light, so I'm going to tone that down just by lightly brushing over top of it. This is the same brown that I used to stain it with. It's just not thinned out as much. So now I'm going to take this darker brown. I'm going to go ahead and put it into the cast shadow and the core shadows. And in this case, I went a little too light to begin with, so I'm going to go ahead and just lightly dust it in to darken up a few of those areas too. All right, now what I can do is I can go back and control my mediums a little bit more with the rag, and so I can lighten up what I've got, because that's the thing you always want to remember. If you put the wrong color on, you put too much of something down, you can add more paint to it, but you can also just simply wipe some of it off. And so I'm going to just tone it down just a little bit. I'm going to get rid of that white a little bit too, for now at least. Probably go back to it and just really control what I'm doing. If you paint from the back forward, it makes your life so much easier. You can intentionally go over your edges temporarily and just keep building. All right, now I'm going to leave that bright spot because I can. But now I need to establish that stem a little bit more. I don't know if I can with just the paint and the rag alone. So I'm going to try to put a highlight on it and it's not really going to show up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a small brush and I'm going to just put a little bit of a highlight on there using some white. So I'm going to take some white and just add a little bit to that stem. Some reflected light there too. Now this has gotten contaminated by just a little of that, so if I need some less bright white, I can put that elsewhere, which then contaminates it a little bit more. And technically, in most cases, like I say, I could have done this whole process without any other colors. I could have just done a monochromatic, but I wanted to take it a little further and see what happened. So there we go. That's a pretty decent start to the piece. Just gonna clean up that edge a little bit. And especially, you know, in this case, this is as far as this painting is gonna, all right, well, this is pretty much only ever gonna be a monochromatic piece. I'm not going to add full color to it. I might add some more colors to it in a second video here just for fun. But for the most part, this is what we have. And so, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is enough for just a quick value study imprimatura underpainting type of piece. So that's it for this one. I will go ahead and add more to it in another video. So there you go.